Hi, my name's Ian Wallace. I call myself the Messed Up Counsellor, which is quite an intriguing name. And the podcast you're about to see is one of many, and we've been doing about a year now. So you can look back and see all the things we've talked about with guests and on my own over the process. A lot of the information I use in the podcast initially came from the first book I wrote in 2011. Why do we do that? And what do we do about it? And that came out and was the basis of all my learning, understanding at that time, which is going back a few years now. And that process of understanding how the world works for people, how we can alter, change, and adapt it, was kind of what it was there to do with the initial stages. I've made that now an audiobook as well, so it's available on Amazon as an audio file that you can check out and you can download to your heart's content, and hopefully that will be helpful. In the podcasts, we're trying to look at all sorts of things that about human interactions, human dynamics, the world, and how we might understand it more or change it more. So it gives you lots of ideas and tools in order to think about and look at different ways of being or dealing with things. And hopefully that brings people together and makes people more able to connect and communicate. Lots of topics. If you ever want to connect to me, just obviously drop me a comment on the podcast and I shall try as much as possible to reply. And if you've got any ideas of things that we might want to use on the podcasts, then please let me know. My name's Ian Wallace. Thanks for looking and thanks for listening. Hi, and welcome to Ian Wallace, the Messed Up Counsellor. Today, what I'd like to look at is something I use when people are in disagreements, when they can't connect, when they don't understand each other. And I use an interaction reaction clock face process. Sometimes we work with relationships that are in some kind of disagreement, conflict, arguments, those kind of things. And arguments can be on many levels, on many topics, in many ways, quite naturally. But there's usually a process behind the argument that is pretty standard and pretty similar, to be fair. And if we can understand the behind the scenes stuff, and then we can usually modify it, change it, and come out with a better result at the end of the day. There is no perfect result, but a better result where both people feel more heard, more listened to, more valued and respected. And it's something that you can use when those things are occurring, those differences of opinion, conflict. You'll find that when people have arguments, that they tend to follow very similar patterns and very similar rules. They might use different things to argue about, but the concept, the structure of the argument is usually pretty similar. So if you use this, you might be able to see where you can interact differently, where you can modify the kind of interactive, reactive process. So if you think of a clock face and draw this on a piece of paper, don't just do it in your head because it's a lot easier to do it when you're writing it down. And you put the numbers in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on, and come back to 12. Then what you can take is any conflict situation, anything you disagree about, anything that you wouldn't normally be able to agree about. Doesn't matter what it is, to be honest. It's just a way of showing the process and understanding it. So you might say, which is a common one, loading the dishwasher. That's a common one, believe it or believe it not. And how people load the dishwasher is very individual sometimes. And people can get very upset about how the dishwasher is loaded. So you could use that at 12. So you put that loading the dishwasher at the top at number 12. And then you'll say, okay, so if somebody loads the dishwasher, if A loads the dishwasher, for example, then B will say, okay, well, when you load the dishwasher, I see that that's not as I would load it, and the things are in the wrong place. So you say, okay, so how does that make you feel? Well, it makes me feel as though frustrated. Why can't you get the way I load this dishwasher? Why can't you change your mind? Why can't you do this? So you say, okay, so you're getting frustrated. That's number one. So then the other person, A, say, okay, so when this person B gets frustrated about this, how do you react to that? What's your feelings and emotions? Well, when they get frustrated, then I think, what's the point in me doing it? Why should I do it? I feel excluded. I feel targeted. Right, okay. So that's A. So when A feels targeted, what do? Well, I kind of withdraw. Oh, okay. So you start withdrawing. All right. So then you go back to B and say, okay, so when A withdraws, what do? Well, I think, what's the point in talking? What's the point in sharing? What's the point in... And you go around the clock face doing the interactive reactive process. That will give you an idea of how each person is reacting, modifying their behaviour, how the negative aspects of that are being received, and what it's doing to the relationship, the people that's in that process. So what you can do then, once you've gone right the way back to 12, you can start at 12 again with the dishwasher, and you can say, okay, so A washes up or puts the stuff in the dishwasher, and B then doesn't get annoyed because they say to A, okay, so you're doing it different. And they allow the difference because maybe there's not a right way or a wrong way to load the dishwasher, really. And then, okay, if you react to that and you say, okay, they're doing it different, let me leave it up to them to do, then you won't feel frustrated or not as frustrated because you're leaving it. The responsibility is in A to do that job, that function, and it's theirs. So if B did that, A, what would you do? Well, I would feel as though I'm being valued and respected. And okay, it's different, but it's my different. Okay. So if you were feeling valued and respected, what would you do? Well, I'd feel included. I'd feel as though I want to reach out. I feel as though I want to share time and energy with this person. Okay. So when they feel they want to spend time with you, what would you do? And you go around the clock face again, using it in a positive way to make a positive result so that each person can feel valued and respected. It's a simple exercise, but it deconstructs the interactive reactive process. And then you can start looking at most things that cause conflict will follow a similar pattern. And the pattern usually is about feeling not valued or respected, judged maybe feeling insecure, separate, isolated. All these aspects of human beings which we don't feel comfortable with. We like to be included. We like to be part of. We don't like to be pushed out. Our insecurity drive is pretty basic and fairly major for us with that process. That if we feel insecure, we usually come out by defending ourselves and attacking the other person. I don't necessarily mean literally physically attacking, but maybe pushing them back with their words, maybe pushing them back with a way of putting them down, making them feel as bad as we feel. So if you're using that concept, the clock, the interactive reactive, and you're breaking it down to its component parts and how those affect you, connect to you, your reactions to them. And then you do the opposite, where you respect and value and do the positive change, and you get the end of that, it will produce a win-win. And I've said in previous podcasts, win-win works, win-lose doesn't. And it won't feel like a battle. It won't feel as though I've got to tell you you're wrong. or I've got to be wrong. Because there isn't usually one way of doing anything. There's usually numerous ways. And each is as valid as the other. And if something doesn't work, what's the worst that can happen? Unless it's a health and safety aspect. Yeah, if the dishes don't get thoroughly washed, then the person who put them in will need to wash them again. That's a learning process. That's a way of finding a different way of doing things, modifying a way that you do things. And it's developing, it's growing, it's becoming. So when you use that action-reaction process and you work on that, you might find that together, obviously not doing it on your own, both people need to be involved in it. You might find it brings a lot of connections, a lot of different ideas, different voices, different interactions with you. And as you go through that, you should find that the relationship becomes closer, becomes more involved, more emotionally intimate, more supportive, because you're both working towards a win-win end. And if you're working towards a win-win end together, then more or less, unless somebody really doesn't want to be connected to you, and they're just finding reasons not to be connected, which, in a sense, it gives you that as well. If they can't find the positive way of interacting, and they're always stuck on the negative, then maybe they're saying something else to you. Maybe they're saying, actually, I don't like you. I don't want to be here. And I'm using all these things to tell you that. That's not helpful sometimes. But as long as we know where we are, then we can work with it. We can try and adapt. We can try and modify. We can try and develop and become better at what we do. But doing that is hard sometimes, owning up to those feelings and emotions that are obviously there, but hasn't been able to be said. Relationships are really hard work. Most people think they just happen, but they're really hard work, and they take an awful lot of effort and time and energy to make them work. It just doesn't happen. Walt Disney's fairy stories are fairy stories, and if you want good quality relationships, you've got to work at it, and you've got to make it work. And if both people want something to work, pretty much it will work. Sometimes with help from people like myself, the mediator, the counsellor, the one that can be the interpreter of both languages, so to speak. But if you want to make those relationships work, you can have a work at it. Hopefully that gave you some ideas. The concept of the clock is in the book. Why do we do that and what do we do about it? Which is available on Amazon, and lots and lots of other tools as well. So from that point of view, I share most of the things I use in my work as a counsellor, helping people to understand things and to get on better. My name's Ian Wallace. I'm the Messed Up Counsellor. Take care.